Long before tanks rolled across deserts and jets ruled the sky, there was a time when humans fought with nothing but stones, sticks, and courage. It was a world where survival wasn't just about food or shelter, it was about protection. Small groups of people lived together, moving from place to place, hunting animals and gathering fruits. But when one group crossed paths with another, and both wanted the same water source or hunting ground, tension was born. That's where it all began, the very first moments of human conflict. At first, it wasn't war as we know it today. It was messy, personal, and full of fear. People didn't yet understand strategies or formations. But even then, something was happening deep inside the human mind, a spark of awareness. Humans started realizing that if they stood together, they were stronger. One person could throw a stone, but 10 people could defend a whole camp. That simple idea became the seed of what we now call organized warfare. As humans learned to live in larger groups, they began to build small villages. And with villages came something new: property. People started saying, "This land is ours." When one group tried to take that land, the others had to defend it. But now, instead of fighting as individuals, they started planning. They made signals, they built simple barriers, and they decided who would guard and who would attack. It wasn't just fighting anymore, it was teamwork. This was the moment humans began to use their minds as weapons. Animals had claws and teeth, but humans had strategy. When danger came, they didn't just react. They thought. They asked, how can we protect everyone? Or how can we win without losing too many? These questions turned simple fights into the early form of war, a strange mix of fear, courage, and intelligence. Imagine a small settlement near a river thousands of years ago. One night, another group approaches, hoping to take the fertile land. The defenders gather around the fire, whispering their plan. Some will hide near the river, others will guard the entrance, and a few will stay back to protect the children. They don't have fancy weapons, but they have something stronger: unity. When the attackers arrive, they're met with a group that moves like one mind. That's when humans first realized together they could dominate. With time, these groups started to organize more clearly. They chose leaders, not because of power, but because of wisdom and experience. The strongest person wasn't always the best leader anymore. The smartest one was. People began to respect those who could think ahead, who could predict what the enemy might do. Slowly, leadership and loyalty became the backbone of human strength. Weapons also evolved. What started as stones became sharpened rocks, then spears, then bows. Each new tool gave humans an edge, and with each invention came a new way to fight. But more than the weapons, it was the planning that made the difference. They learned to train, to prepare, to watch the skies and read the land. Nature became both ally and teacher. In those days, battles weren't fought for glory. They were about survival. Every choice had meaning, whether to attack, to wait, or to make peace. And in those choices, humans started building something greater than victory: understanding. They realized that war wasn't just about winning land. It was about protecting families, traditions, and the future. As communities grew, small conflicts turned into bigger ones. Tribes began to merge into early civilizations. Around the same time, humans discovered farming. That changed everything. Farming meant food, and food meant growth. But it also meant something valuable that others might want to take. So the need for defense became even greater. To guard their crops and homes, people began to build walls. Some of the earliest cities on Earth, like those in Mesopotamia, were surrounded by huge stone walls, symbols of both protection and power. Inside those walls lived organized people, each with a role to play. Some farmed, some built, and some learned the art of defending. For the first time in human history, there were full-time warriors, people who dedicated their lives to protecting others. This was a major turning point. The concept of an army was born, and with it, the first structured system of defense. It's fascinating to think about how human creativity played a part here. When one group built a wall, another learned how to climb it. When one tribe made shields, another created stronger weapons. This constant push and pull didn't just make people better at fighting. It made them better at thinking, innovating, and adapting. Humans proved that their real strength wasn't muscle, but mind. As these early societies expanded, they began to record their victories and losses. Stories were told around fires. Tales of brave defenders who protected their people and clever leaders who outsmarted their rivals. These stories inspired future generations to be more strategic, more united, and more prepared. Over time, they became legends, passing down not just courage but also lessons in leadership and cooperation. But even in those early battles, there was a strange sense of respect. Many tribes believed that war should have limits. They didn't fight to destroy everything. They fought to defend what mattered most, and that sense of purpose kept humanity grounded even as power grew. Another important change came when humans started using animals in warfare. Horses, camels, and even elephants became trusted companions. This partnership between humans and animals changed everything. Travel became faster, communication improved, and armies could move across vast lands. Humans were no longer bound by distance. They could project their strength farther than ever before. As time passed, the art of war became a symbol of civilization itself. Where once there was chaos, now there was order. Armies had ranks, training routines, and formations. Commanders learned to read maps, study the terrain, and plan ahead. And behind every victory there was now a deep system of coordination. Humanity had learned that true power didn't come from individual bravery. It came from discipline, unity, and intelligence. Still, the dawn of organized warfare wasn't only about fighting. It was also about building. Forts, walls, and towers became a part of human identity. These structures didn't just protect people. They showed that humans could shape the world to their advantage. From riverside settlements to mountain fortresses, every creation told the same story. That humans were no longer just surviving in nature. They were mastering it. By the end of this era, the world had changed forever. People no longer lived as scattered groups of hunters. They had built communities, armies, and systems of defense that would last for generations. The first signs of civilization, laws, leadership, cooperation, were all born from the need to protect and organize. Looking back, it's clear that this was the moment when humans began to prove their military dominance, not through destruction, but through structure and intelligence. They discovered that survival wasn't just about fighting. It was about working together, thinking ahead, and understanding one another. This was the dawn of something far greater than battle. It was the dawn of strategy. The moment when humanity took its first step toward mastering the art of war. And as history would later show, that small spark, the realization that unity and planning could overcome chaos, would grow into one of the most powerful forces the world has ever seen. From these humble beginnings, humans would go on to build empires, write war manuals, and design weapons that would shape the course of history. But it all started here, in the quiet shadows of early civilization, when humans first learned that together they could change the world. When humans learned to fight together, they didn't just protect their homes, they started to dream bigger. Villages grew into towns, and towns turned into cities. People built roads, temples, and markets. Life became more organized, more ambitious. But with growth came something else, the hunger for power. Some leaders began to think beyond their own lands. They wanted to unite many tribes under one rule, to build something larger than anyone had ever seen before, an empire. This was a new age, a time when humanity began to think in terms of strategy, not just strength. The leaders of this era were not just warriors. They were thinkers. They believed that to win a battle, you had to first win in the mind. They studied the land, the weather, and even the habits of their enemies. Every move had meaning. Every decision shaped history. Across vast deserts, high mountains, and endless plains, armies began to march under banners that represented nations. Soldiers didn't just fight because they were told to. They fought for pride, for belonging, for the idea of something greater than themselves. This was the rise of empires, where human intelligence, organization, and determination created powers that stretched across continents. In these growing empires, wars were no longer about survival alone. They became about vision. Leaders wanted to spread their culture, their laws, and their way of life. They built roads to connect distant lands and developed new ways to communicate. Messengers could carry orders across hundreds of miles, and farmers could send food to feed entire armies. The art of war now included planning, logistics, and diplomacy. Imagine a great army preparing for a campaign thousands of years ago. Soldiers line up in perfect rows, their weapons shining under the morning sun. Commanders study maps drawn on animal skin. Scouts return with reports of enemy movement. Drums beat in rhythm as orders are given. Everything moves like clockwork. Precise, disciplined, united. This wasn't chaos anymore. It was organization at its highest form. And it showed the true power of the human mind. But military dominance was never only about fighting. It was also about learning. In some places, wise thinkers began to write down their thoughts on strategy and leadership. They studied how battles were won or lost. They believed that success depended not only on strength, but also on timing, planning, and understanding human nature. These lessons became the world's first guidebooks on warfare, teaching future generations that victory was as much about wisdom as courage. Empires rose one after another. Each brought something new: a better weapon, a smarter formation, a stronger system of command. In one part of the world, people learned to fight in tight ranks, shoulder to shoulder, forming shields that moved like a wall. In another, cavalry ruled the open plains, moving fast and striking hard. Elsewhere, navies turned the seas into battlegrounds, showing that control of water could mean control of trade, and therefore power. These advancements weren't just random. They were the result of human creativity, observation, and experience. Every war, every mistake, every victory added to humanity's understanding of how to organize and dominate. People learned that winning wasn't always about having the biggest army. Sometimes it was about outthinking the enemy, tricking them, surrounding them, or making them move when they didn't want to. One clever idea could decide the fate of thousands. For example, some commanders learned to use the environment to their advantage. They would lead enemies into narrow valleys where numbers didn't matter, or wait for storms that weakened the opposing side. Some even used deception, pretending to retreat only to strike back when the enemy was off guard. These moments showed that the real battlefield wasn't just made of dirt and stone. It was inside the human mind. While the art of war was becoming more advanced, empires were also shaping the world in other ways. They built roads that connected faraway lands, allowing trade and culture to spread. They created languages of command that soldiers from different regions could understand. They made uniforms and symbols that gave people identity. The same systems that helped win wars also helped build civilizations, but not everything was about conquest. Many great leaders of this time understood that peace was just as powerful as war. After winning territories, some rulers focused on building schools, gardens, and temples. They realized that a strong empire was not one that conquered the most land, but one that lasted the longest. And to last, an empire needed stability, something that came from fairness, learning, and cooperation. In cities across the world, marketplaces buzzed with traders from different lands. Ideas traveled faster than ever before and about science, art, and even governance. Soldiers returning from campaigns brought new knowledge home. The world was slowly becoming connected through both war and peace. Humans weren't just proving their military dominance. They were proving their intelligence, adaptability, and unity. In the middle of all this, ordinary people played their part too. Farmers grew crops to feed armies. Blacksmiths worked day and night to craft weapons and armor. Families waited for news of loved ones who marched far away. Everyone, in some way, was a part of the system that kept these great empires moving. The story of military dominance was not just about kings and generals. It was about millions of people working together, each one playing a small but important role. As time passed, the idea of organized armies spread everywhere. Training camps appeared in every major kingdom. Soldiers learned how to march in formation, how to use their weapons properly, and how to follow orders without confusion. Battles were now fought with precision, not chaos. Communication became faster. Orders were written, delivered, and executed within hours. Humans had turned warfare into a science. But behind this progress, something deeper was happening. Humans were beginning to understand the value of discipline, loyalty, and teamwork. These qualities, once limited to the battlefield, started shaping daily life. The same discipline that trained soldiers also helped build cities and run governments. The same loyalty that united armies kept societies together. The art of war, in a strange way, became the art of civilization. Empires continued to rise and fall, but one truth remained: intelligence always won in the end. A well-planned strategy could defeat a much larger force. A single idea could change the course of history. And in every era, humans found new ways to adapt, to innovate, and to outsmart their challenges. When we look back at this time in history, it's easy to see it only as a series of battles. But in reality, it was something far greater. It was the moment when humans proved that they could shape the world with their minds as much as with their hands. They learned how to lead, how to plan, and how to unite. The rise of empires was really the rise of human intelligence, a celebration of creativity, discipline, and the never-ending desire to build something bigger. These empires may have vanished with time, but their influence remains everywhere. The roads we travel, the systems we follow, even the languages we speak, many of them were born from those ancient societies. Their military structures became the foundation for modern governments and organizations. Their strategies inspired leaders for thousands of years. The rise of empires was not just about who conquered whom. It was about how humans learned to organize, cooperate, and think on a massive scale. It was about turning chaos into order. It was about the birth of leadership, the power of teamwork, and the endless creativity of the human spirit. When humans first began fighting as tribes, they did it for survival. But during this age, they fought for something more, for progress, for unity, and for the dream of greatness. Every empire that rose left behind lessons about strength, wisdom, and resilience. Those lessons still guide humanity today. The story of this era reminds us that true dominance doesn't come from weapons or fear. It comes from intelligence, understanding, and the ability to adapt. Humanity had learned how to turn the art of war into the science of success. And that was the real beginning of their rise as the most dominant species on Earth. The world had changed. The age of empires had taught humans how to lead, how to plan, and how to fight together. But now, something even bigger was on the horizon. A new power, one that didn't come from kings or soldiers but from machines. It started quietly, with smoke rising from chimneys and the rhythmic sound of gears turning. People began to invent things that made life faster, easier, and more efficient. The Industrial Revolution had arrived, and with it a new kind of power, the power of technology. At first, no one realized how much this would change everything. What began as small machines to spin cloth or pump water soon grew into massive engines that could move ships, trains, and entire armies. Humans had always relied on strength, of muscle, of numbers, of will. But now, for the first time, they had something else, mechanical strength. Factories filled with workers replaced small workshops. Machines began to do the work of hundreds of hands. Steam engines roared, trains rushed across the land, and ships powered by iron began to rule the oceans. The world became faster, louder, and more connected than ever before. And as this industrial power spread, so did the idea that it could be used for defense and for dominance. People started realizing that the same machines that helped build bridges or spin thread could also make cannons, vehicles, and weapons. Metal became the most valuable resource of the time. Blacksmiths turned into engineers, and inventors became the new leaders of progress. Science had joined the army, and together they would reshape history. In earlier times, battles were decided by courage and coordination. But now innovation began to take the lead. The countries that could build faster, transport supplies more efficiently, and communicate quickly were the ones that stayed ahead. It was no longer just about bravery. It was about production. The Industrial Revolution taught humans that power could come from machines, not just men. A factory could build in a day what once took months. A steam train could carry supplies across nations. Soldiers could now travel farther and stay connected with their leaders through new technologies. For the first time, war was no longer limited by distance. Imagine a massive steel train puffing smoke as it carried supplies and troops across hundreds of miles. The sound of wheels grinding against iron rails became the heartbeat of a new kind of strength, the strength of movement, speed, and logistics. Communication, too, changed everything. The invention of the telegraph allowed leaders to send messages in minutes instead of days. Orders could travel across borders in an instant. Armies no longer had to guess what their leaders wanted. They could receive updates as events unfolded. This ability to connect, to coordinate across vast lands, gave humans a new level of control they had never known before. But the Industrial Revolution was not only about machines and power. It was also about people, the workers, inventors, and dreamers who made it all happen. In smoky cities, people worked day and night, driven by the hope that their efforts were building a stronger, more advanced world. Every invention, every gear, every spark of creativity came from the human desire to improve and survive. With every passing year, technology advanced. Rifles replaced old weapons, ships became larger and faster, and factories produced more than ever. Human hands built machines that could shape mountains and cross oceans. The balance of power was changing. not only between nations, but between humans and nature itself. For the first time in history, humanity had the tools to reshape the Earth. Industrial power also changed how people thought about warfare. In earlier ages, wars were personal, fought with swords and shields face to face. Now they were distant, driven by machines and strategies. This brought both excitement and fear. People were amazed by what technology could do, but they also began to realize how easily it could be misused. Still, innovation didn't stop. Engineers and scientists worked hand in hand with leaders, pushing boundaries further each year. The same curiosity that created the printing press and the steam engine was now focused on building stronger ships, faster vehicles, and more precise tools. Nations began to compete not only in land and trade, but in invention. Every country wanted to be the most advanced, the most powerful, the most prepared. It was an age of progress, but also an age of rivalry. The world was transforming at a breathtaking speed. Cities glowed with new lights powered by coal and steam. Bridges spanned mighty rivers. Ships sailed farther than ever, connecting continents. Trade expanded, cultures met, and ideas spread like wildfire. And yet, beneath all this progress, one truth remained. Humans were still driven by the same instinct to defend, to dominate, and to survive. The machine had become an extension of human ambition. It could build wonders, but it could also break them. The Industrial Revolution showed both sides of humanity, the creator and the controller, the builder and the fighter. As machines became more advanced, armies became more organized. Soldiers now wore uniforms made in factories. Weapons were built to exact measurements, identical and efficient. The concept of mass production made it possible to equip thousands in the same way. No longer did armies depend on handmade tools or local blacksmiths. They had factories, vast, roaring places where metal met fire, where sparks flew, and where human imagination turned into mechanical might. It was the first time in history when the line between science and war almost disappeared. Every discovery had two sides, one for progress and one for power. But behind all this industrial strength were human stories, of innovation, of hope, and of endurance. Inventors stayed awake for nights perfecting machines that would make life easier. Workers toiled endlessly to build engines that powered cities. And somewhere a young soldier learned to use a machine he had never seen before, trusting that it would protect his people. Through these changes, humanity learned an important lesson, that dominance was not only about who had the biggest army, but who could adapt the fastest. Those who embraced technology, who learned to think differently, always stayed ahead. Factories became the new battlefields of preparation. Scientists became as important as generals. Knowledge became a weapon, and creativity became the key to victory. The Industrial Revolution did not just change how humans fought. It changed how they lived, how they thought, and how they worked together. It was a time when progress and power walked hand in hand. As nations grew stronger through machines, they also became more connected. Railways carried people and goods across countries. Ships linked continents. For the first time, humans could truly say that the world was within their reach. This age of invention brought pride and confidence, a sense that anything was possible. People felt unstoppable, as if they had finally mastered not just their surroundings but their destiny. However, with great power came great responsibility. As machines made life easier, they also made destruction easier. Humanity stood at a crossroads, one path leading to progress, the other to peril. But even then, most people believed in hope. They believed that technology was meant to build, not destroy, to make life better, to connect people, to create a future brighter than the past. The Industrial Revolution was not just about machines. It was about the human spirit, bold, restless, and endlessly curious. It proved that humans could take simple ideas and turn them into forces that reshaped the planet. From steam engines to iron ships, from factories to telegraphs, every invention was a reminder that the greatest power of all came from the human mind. This was the era when humans didn't just prove their military dominance, they proved their creative dominance. They showed that imagination could be turned into metal, and dreams could become engines. The world would never be the same again. As smoke rose over cities and machines hummed day and night, humanity stood on the edge of a new chapter. one where progress and power would walk side by side. The foundations of the modern world were being laid, one invention at a time. The Industrial Revolution had given humans something they had never had before, the ability to shape not just the land they lived on, but the very future of civilization. It was the moment when people realized that the greatest engine in the world was not made of iron or fire, it was the human mind itself. The world had entered a new age. Machines had changed everything, from how people worked to how they traveled, built, and even thought. The Industrial Revolution had given humans speed, power, and endless possibilities. But it had also planted a new kind of seed: competition. Nations wanted to show who was stronger, smarter, and more advanced. Pride began to rise, and with it came tension. Across continents, people felt both hope and fear. They had seen how powerful machines could be. Trains crossed mountains, ships traveled across oceans, and factories built everything from tools to clothes. But those same machines could now build something else, weapons more powerful than anything humanity had ever seen. In the early years of the 20th century, the world stood on edge. Countries formed alliances, building trust on one side and suspicion on the other. Leaders spoke of peace, but behind closed doors they prepared for war. Factories that once made engines and equipment now produced ammunition and machines built for battle. No one wanted to believe it. But the world was about to face a storm like never before. When the first great global conflict began, it shocked everyone. People thought it would be over quickly, but it stretched on for years. For the first time in history, nations from across the globe were drawn into a single struggle. Soldiers marched not just for land, but for survival, and families back home faced hardship as the world around them changed. It was during this time that humans showed both their greatest strength and their deepest vulnerability. The scale of the conflict was unlike anything before. Airplanes, once a new and exciting invention, now flew across battlefields. Ships carried troops across oceans. Radios allowed leaders to command armies from miles away. Humanity had reached a level of organization and technological ability that was truly astonishing, but terrifying at the same time. Factories worked day and night, not just to produce goods but to fuel the engines of war. Men, women, and even young workers joined the effort in every way they could. It was not just soldiers on the front lines. It was entire nations working together toward a single cause. And through it all, one thing became clear: humans had reached the peak of their military dominance. They could build, move, and plan on a global scale. Communication traveled faster than ever before, allowing strategies to be made with precision and speed. The world had become smaller, but also more dangerous. When the First Great War finally ended, people across the globe felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Millions had been affected, and cities across continents bore the scars of conflict. But even as the world tried to heal, something else was happening. Technology continued to advance. Planes grew faster, engines became stronger, and nations started rebuilding, not just to recover, but to prepare. The years that followed were filled with change. New inventions appeared one after another: radios in homes, cars on roads, and new machines in factories. The world seemed to be entering a bright new future, but under that hope was a quiet tension. Some countries rose again, determined to prove their strength. And slowly, step by step, humanity found itself on the path to another, even greater test. When the second global conflict began, it was like the world had forgotten the pain of the first. But this time, everything was bigger: the machines, the numbers, and the stakes. Technology had advanced so far that war had become faster, wider, and more connected. Armies didn't just fight in one region. They fought across seas, skies, and continents. Planes could now travel long distances. Ships carried supplies and troops across oceans in record time. Communication networks connected nations like never before. It was no longer about a single country fighting another. It was the world itself, divided and determined to prove who was stronger. In this chaos, humans once again showed both brilliance and resilience. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly to create new tools and systems that could give their side an advantage. They discovered new materials, built faster engines, and designed technology that would change the world forever. But even as humanity reached new heights of innovation, a shadow grew over it. The same knowledge that had powered progress was now being used to create weapons of unimaginable power. The line between invention and destruction had never been so thin. And then it happened, the moment that would forever change human history. A weapon so powerful was created that it could destroy entire cities in seconds. It was the result of years of research, hard work, and human genius, but it came with a cost too heavy to bear. When it was finally used, the world stood still. For the first time, humanity saw what its own creation could do, and it was terrifying. That day wasn't just the end of a war. It was the beginning of a realization. Humans had reached a point where they could control forces greater than themselves. They had built machines that could fly faster than sound, travel under the sea, and even split the atom. It was the ultimate proof of dominance, but also a warning. As peace slowly returned, the world looked around and began to rebuild. The destruction was immense, but the spirit to start again was even stronger. Cities were rebuilt, families reunited, and people everywhere promised themselves that such a conflict should never happen again. Yet deep inside, one truth remained. Humans had proven what they were capable of. They had shown unmatched creativity, organization, and courage. They had turned ideas into inventions and inventions into power. But they had also learned that with great power comes great responsibility. The world wars were more than just battles between nations. They were turning points in human history. They showed how far humanity could go when pushed to the limit, in both creation and compassion. Scientists who once built machines for war later turned their minds to inventions that improved life, medicine, transportation, and communication. The same drive that fueled conflict was now being redirected toward rebuilding. Ordinary people became heroes not just for fighting, but for helping. Farmers who shared food, doctors who treated the wounded, and workers who rebuilt towns all played their part in restoring humanity's heart. The world learned that true strength didn't only lie in machines or armies. It also lived in kindness, unity, and the desire to protect. By the end of this era, humanity had changed forever. Nations formed groups to work together and prevent future conflicts. The idea of peace became more powerful than the idea of conquest. People began to understand that dominance wasn't about destruction. It was about responsibility, balance, and the wisdom to use power for good. Airplanes that once carried bombs now carried passengers. Ships that once transported weapons now carried food and aid. Factories that built machines of war now produce cars, radios, and tools that made life better. Humanity had turned its greatest challenge into its greatest lesson. The world wars had pushed human potential to the edge. They proved that humans could organize, innovate, and endure more than anyone thought possible. But they also reminded everyone that true greatness comes not from power, but from understanding how to use it wisely. In those years of struggle, humans proved something far deeper than military strength. They proved their capacity to rebuild, to forgive, and to hope. They showed that even after the darkest times, they could rise again stronger, smarter, and more united. As the dust settled and peace returned, people everywhere looked to the sky, not with fear this time, but with wonder. Airplanes now flew for exploration, not for war. The same skies that once echoed with thunder were now filled with dreams of connection and discovery. The wars had ended, but they left behind a lesson that would echo through generations, that true dominance is not in how much power one has, but in how that power is used. Humanity had reached both its peak and its peril, and through it all it learned to value peace more than pride. The world had changed forever. The scars remained, but so did the lessons. Humans had proven their strength not just in battle, but in rebuilding what was lost. From the ashes of destruction, a new vision of unity and cooperation began to rise, one built not on fear, but on hope. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. The world was quiet after the Great Wars, but it was not peaceful inside. People everywhere were rebuilding their homes, planting new hopes, and trying to forget the noise of destruction. The skies were clear again, the factories were busy making tools for life instead of weapons, and children could finally play without fear. But deep down, nations still watched one another closely. Trust was fragile. The world had seen how powerful humanity could become, and that power made everyone cautious. Two great powers began to rise from the ashes of war, both determined to lead the world in their own way. They didn't fight with swords or soldiers this time. Instead, they fought with ideas, science, and technology. This was a different kind of conflict, one without battlefields, without marching armies. It was a war of the mind, a race for dominance without direct fighting. The world called it the Cold War. In this new era, the competition was about who could build more, invent faster, and think smarter. Each side wanted to prove that their system was stronger, that their people were more advanced, and that their nation could lead the future. But behind all the speeches and inventions was one silent, terrifying truth. Both sides now had weapons so powerful that if they were ever used, the world might not survive. That fear became the invisible border that kept them apart. Neither side wanted to start a war they couldn't end. So instead of fighting, they began to compete in other ways. They raced to build rockets to reach space and to explore the unknown. The competition that once destroyed now began to inspire. Scientists worked day and night. Engineers built machines that touched the stars. And ordinary people followed every new achievement with wide eyes and hope. For the first time, the human race looked beyond the Earth, not to conquer but to explore. The Cold War may have started as a rivalry, but it pushed humanity to reach heights never imagined before. One morning, people around the world turned on their radios and heard something amazing. A human-made object had entered space. The news spread everywhere. The impossible had become possible. Suddenly, the sky wasn't just a ceiling. It was a path. This space race became the new symbol of power. Nations built rockets, satellites, and spacecrafts not only to show strength, but also to prove what humans were capable of. Scientists who once designed tools for war now designed machines that opened the door to the stars. It was a strange and beautiful balance, competition that led to discovery. But even with these incredible achievements, tension remained. Each side watched the other carefully, counting their weapons, their rockets, and their alliances. It was as if the world was holding its breath, hoping that no one would take the first step toward destruction. This time, power wasn't just about fighting. It was about deterrence, the ability to stop war by showing that you were strong enough to win one if it ever came. Nations built larger and more advanced weapons not to use them, but to make sure no one dared to start a war again. It was a strange logic and peace through fear, but it worked. The threat of destruction became the reason to maintain peace. Both sides understood that one wrong move could end everything, so they learned to be careful, to communicate, and to think before acting. Diplomacy became as powerful as any army. Behind the scenes, leaders and diplomats met in secret rooms, discussing how to keep the world safe. They signed treaties, set limits, and tried to find ways to trust each other, even when they didn't. It was not easy, but it was necessary. The Cold War wasn't fought on battlefields. It was fought through intelligence, patience, and restraint. Meanwhile, ordinary people continued living their lives. They worked, studied, and dreamed. Children looked up at the stars, inspired by astronauts who risked their lives to explore space. Scientists found cures for diseases, built computers, and made discoveries that changed everyday life. The same competition that once brought fear now pushed humanity forward. The Cold War became more than a rivalry between nations. It became a test of human maturity. Could humanity control its power? Could it choose progress over destruction? For decades, the world lived in this uneasy balance. Every year brought new challenges, conflicts in smaller regions, political struggles, and moments of tension that made hearts race. Yet through it all, the world managed to avoid another global war. The memory of the past was still too fresh, and no one wanted to see history repeat itself. Technology continued to grow rapidly. Machines became smarter, communication faster, and transportation more efficient. The same drive that had once created engines of war now built computers, satellites, and global networks. The Cold War had quietly transformed the world into something far more connected. Information traveled across oceans in seconds. People could hear news from the other side of the planet instantly. The very idea of distance began to disappear. And though the world was divided by politics, it was united by technology. One of the most symbolic moments of this era came not from a battlefield, but from the sky. When humans finally set foot on the moon, the entire planet watched together. For a brief moment, there were no borders, no rival nations, just humanity, standing together staring at the stars. That single step on the moon showed what humans could achieve when they aimed higher than fear. It was proof that the same energy once used for war could be turned into something extraordinary. The Cold War had started as a struggle for control, but it ended up inspiring a generation to dream bigger. Still, the fear of conflict never fully disappeared. Hidden deep beneath the progress was the constant awareness that weapons of great power still existed. But instead of using them, nations learned to talk, to negotiate, and to compromise. The art of diplomacy became humanity's greatest defense. It was during this time that people realized something profound, that dominance didn't have to come from violence. It could come from intelligence, patience, and influence. The true leaders were not those who shouted the loudest, but those who thought the longest and acted with care. By the late years of the Cold War, small changes began to appear. Walls that divided nations and ideologies started to fall, both physically and emotionally. The world was beginning to heal. People were tired of fear. They wanted freedom, connection, and peace. When the great divide between the rival powers finally ended, it wasn't with an explosion or a final battle. It ended quietly, through words, agreements, and understanding. The world exhaled after decades of holding its breath. The Cold War taught humanity one of its greatest lessons, that power without control is dangerous, but power with wisdom can protect. It showed that progress doesn't always come from fighting. Sometimes it comes from restraint. Nations learned that dominance doesn't have to mean destruction. True dominance is when you are strong enough to fight, but wise enough not to. The ability to prevent war became the greatest achievement of all, and behind every great decision of that time were people, scientists, workers, teachers, families, who wanted a better future. They were the real heroes of the Cold War, the ones who believed that knowledge, unity, and peace were stronger than any weapon. By the end of this era, the world looked different. Technology had advanced more in a few decades than in the entire previous century. People could speak across oceans, travel around the world, and see beyond the stars. Humanity had not only survived a time of great fear, it had evolved. The Cold War proved that the greatest victories don't always come from battles. Sometimes they come from patience, intelligence, and the courage to hold back when every instinct says to move forward. It was a war of silence, but it spoke loudly to the world, teaching that peace built on respect and understanding can last longer than any victory built on force. And as the tension finally began to fade, a new age dawned, one filled with hope, discovery, and endless possibility. Humanity had faced the edge of destruction and turned away. For the first time, the world began to believe that cooperation could be stronger than conflict. The Cold War had shown both the danger of power and the beauty of restraint. It was not just a story of competition between nations, but a story of human growth, of learning to use strength not to harm, but to protect. And that, in the end, became one of humanity's greatest achievements. The world had changed forever. The Great Wars were now memories in old photographs, and the Cold War had slowly faded into history. But even though the guns had gone silent, the desire for power and protection was still alive. Humanity had learned that war didn't always need soldiers on the ground or bombs in the sky. The new battles were being fought somewhere else, in labs, in offices, in satellites, and later on screens. Technology had become the new weapon, and information was the new battlefield. The modern era was not about who had the biggest army, but who could control data, communication, and intelligence. The battlefield had shifted from land, sea, and air to something invisible but even more powerful, the digital world. It started quietly. Computers were first used to help armies plan, to store records, and to communicate faster. But soon they became tools for everything, from guiding planes to managing entire defense systems. Satellites circled above the planet, watching, listening, and connecting people everywhere. The world was shrinking. Distance no longer mattered. Every country wanted to stay ahead. Scientists worked day and night, creating systems that could think, predict, and react faster than humans ever could. Machines were now not only tools but partners in every mission. Drones could fly without pilots. Robots could move through dangerous places where no human could survive. And computers could analyze millions of pieces of information in seconds. At first, this new kind of warfare looked safe, clean, distant, and controlled. No explosions, no marching soldiers, no destroyed cities. But soon people realized that this invisible war was just as real, and sometimes even more dangerous. Now, a few lines of code could bring down a system. A simple virus could stop communication across an entire region. Instead of bombs, people were using data. And data, it turned out, could be more powerful than any weapon. But this story is not only about machines and codes. It's about people, the minds behind the screens, the ones who believed that knowledge could protect their nations, and the others who feared what might happen if that power fell into the wrong hands. The modern world had opened new doors, and behind each door was both opportunity and risk. Nations started building cyber armies, not soldiers with guns, but experts with keyboards. They didn't wear uniforms, but they protected their countries just the same. Their weapons were intelligence, creativity, and quick thinking. In this new kind of competition, speed became everything. Whoever could think faster, act smarter, and innovate earlier held the upper hand. The fight for dominance had moved into the world of ideas and innovation. Artificial intelligence began to play a role too. Machines started learning, not just following commands, but making decisions. They could analyze patterns, predict movements, and even simulate real battle situations. It was a new level of human creation, almost like giving birth to a new kind of intelligence. But with every great invention comes responsibility. Humanity had to make choices about how far to go. Could they trust machines with decisions that once belonged only to humans? Could they make sure technology was used for safety, not destruction? At the same time, the world was becoming more connected than ever. The internet linked billions of people. A message could reach across continents in seconds. Information was everywhere and anyone could share it. It was the age of global connection, but also global vulnerability. Governments realized that their biggest threats might not come from armies, but from invisible attacks, digital strikes that could disable power grids, steal information, or manipulate systems. Cybersecurity became the new front line. Experts began working quietly, protecting the digital world just like soldiers once guarded the borders. This was the new face of human military dominance, not loud, not visible, but deeply intelligent. It was about control, prediction, and prevention. The goal was no longer to destroy an enemy, but to stay one step ahead of them. And while nations built their digital defenses, technology also began to change daily life. The same satellites that watched the skies for safety now guided airplanes, cars, and even phones. The same computers that ran military systems now helped farmers grow food, and doctors save lives. It was a strange balance. The same technology that could be used for war was now improving life everywhere. Humanity had finally reached a point where power and progress walked hand in hand. As time went on, the competition between nations evolved. Instead of racing to build bombs or weapons, they began racing to build better technology, faster computers, smarter systems, and stronger networks. The battles of the modern age were fought through innovation, not invasion. The rise of artificial intelligence made this race even more intense. Machines could now perform tasks that once needed hundreds of people. They could monitor borders, detect threats, and process information beyond human capability. But even as technology grew stronger, one thing remained true. The most powerful weapon was still the human mind. Because behind every algorithm, behind every piece of code, there was a person, someone thinking, planning, and imagining. Technology was powerful, but it needed human direction. It needed emotion, ethics, and purpose. The modern era taught people something that no weapon ever could, that real power is not only in strength or technology, but in wisdom and balance. Humanity had created machines that could do incredible things, but they also learned that machines couldn't replace what made people truly human: empathy, judgment, and heart. In many ways, the modern military became less about fighting and more about preventing fights. Intelligence agencies worked together, sharing information to stop attacks before they happened. Nations began to talk more, to use communication and cooperation as their first line of defense. This shift showed how much humanity had grown. In the past, power meant conquering. Now power meant protecting people, information, and peace. And while some countries still focused on building weapons, others focused on building trust. Organizations were formed to prevent wars, to solve problems before they turned into conflicts. Diplomacy became stronger with technology, as world leaders could speak instantly, share evidence, and make decisions faster than ever. Even in this new world of machines and data, people still mattered most. A computer could process information, but only a human could decide what was right. A drone could fly into danger, but only a human could choose when to send it. Technology gave humans strength, but humans gave technology meaning. As decades passed, the modern world continued to evolve. Wars became less about territory and more about influence. The fight for dominance moved into economics, technology, and even social media. Every tweet, every video, every piece of shared information became part of a larger story. The struggle for attention, trust, and control. The modern battlefield was now everywhere, in cyberspace, in trade and communication. But even with all this complexity, the goal was still the same as it had been since the beginning of time: survival, safety, and respect. Humanity had come a long way, from fighting with stones and spears to controlling machines that could reach the stars. And through it all, one thing had never changed: the desire to prove dominance, but also the hope to live in peace. The greatest challenge of this era was not how powerful humans could become, but how wisely they could use that power. Because with every new discovery came new responsibility. People began to realize that dominance didn't mean ruling others. It meant mastering themselves. It meant using intelligence not to harm but to guide. It meant learning that the strongest nations are those that can lead with knowledge, protect with technology, and care with humanity. In the end, the modern era became a mirror, reflecting what humans had always been capable of. It showed both the brilliance and the danger of ambition. It reminded the world that every great power starts with a simple human idea, and that same idea can shape the future, for better or worse. As the world entered the age of artificial intelligence, space exploration, and digital networks, it stood on the edge of something extraordinary. The question was no longer who could build the most powerful weapon, but who could build the most peaceful world. The story of human military dominance had come full circle, from ancient swords to silent satellites. Each era had shown a different kind of power, but the lesson was always the same. The true measure of dominance is not in how much destruction one can cause, but in how much peace one can protect. And so, as the modern world continues to grow, one truth remains: humanity's greatest victory is not in proving its strength, but in proving its wisdom. The most powerful force on earth is still the human spirit, curious, creative, and endlessly determined to survive, to learn, and to rise.